All right. So I'm Dr. Jill Gaidos. I'm an associate professor at Yale. I am our vice chief of clinical research for the section of digestive diseases, as well as the director of clinical research at our IBD program. So that was included. So the objectives of the talk today are just to briefly review or provide an overview of the different phases of clinical trials, just so we're all kind of speaking the same language. Discuss the current trends in pharmaceutical clinical trials for the management of inflammatory bowel disease and its complications, and then review some of the recent changes in clinical trial design that really benefit IBD patients. We've given a lot of feedback to some of these pharmaceutical companies, and they're now making changes. They're really listening to our concerns and the patient's concerns. And then talk about some opportunities to consider participation in a clinical trial from a patient perspective. So why are clinical trials important in inflammatory bowel disease? So we know that about 20 to 30% of our IBD patients won't respond at all to their first treatment. Many of you may have experienced this. And then about 60% of our patients, once they do respond, may actually lose response to that therapy. So figuring out which medicine to use and when, and then also having to go through a series of medications is a really common situation. Clinical trials really play a key role in developing new treatment options. As we talk about, you'll see there's several different new mechanisms of action for treating inflammation that are coming to the market and that are under investigation, which is really important because if you've had inflammatory bowel disease for any number of years, you may have gone through all of the options that are on the market and really need something else. We also need more targeted treatment options. All of you, I'm sure, will agree that we need things that are easier to take with less risk of side effects. In our clinics, as we're doing sort of this shared decision-making and talking about potential adverse side effects and risk of complications with these therapies, that's a really long visit because we have to cover everything. So we really need easier, safer medications. And then 2, we need to be able to provide precision medicine. So Dr. Matar talked a little bit about that, but really it would be ideal if you came into clinic, we could figure out what exactly is driving your inflammation, and then we could give you a medicine to target that. So that's really, I think, where we're headed, and fingers crossed, the people with the money that are studying all of this hopefully agree with me, but it seems to be. So a phase 1 clinical trial, really the purpose of the phase 1 is just to answer, is this medication safe for use? So this is really the first step in human studies of an investigational product or new medication. These tend to be pretty small, and they usually study this in healthy subjects. So they're not looking at safety in patients with inflammatory bowel disease, targeting ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, really just looking at different doses and what are adverse side effects or adverse reactions that occur at these different dosing ranges. They're really not looking for any treatment response at this stage. So after the phase 1, if they don't find any serious side effects, and then 2, they're sort of looking at a dosing range as well, then they'll start a phase 2 trial. So the purpose of the phase 2 is the medication effective in the targeted population? So most clinical trials will either do ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. So it would be 2 separate studies for each disease. These tend to be pretty small, so they include about 25 to 100 patients, and they're looking at different dosing arms. So subjects would be randomly assigned to a different treatment arm, again, potentially looking at several different doses to get a signal that this medication may be effective for either Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. And then 2, in this particular population, they're looking to see if any new adverse side effects or bad reactions develop. So assuming all goes well with the phase 2, so no new serious side effects, and there is a signal for benefit, so they have to meet that endpoint as well, then the medication goes into the phase 3. And this is typically what, some of us do some phase 2s, but predominantly the phase 3 studies are the big studies. So this is where we need lots of patients. And then these are the ones that are done across many, many sites. So the question here is, does the medication work better than placebo or other medications that are already available for IBD? Not a lot of comparative effectiveness studies available right now, so that's when you're comparing to a medication that's already on the market. But the FDA does require a placebo arm. These tend to be longer studies. They last several years for the sponsors to complete enrollment, so they have to get all the numbers that they need. Like I said, these are much larger. They have several hundred subjects in the different treatment arms. And then again, they're comparing placebo to the other medication, the investigational product. The FDA does require pharmaceutical companies to include some type of colonoscopy if the area of disease is within reach of a scope. I have been involved in some studies that were small bowel only, where we were allowed to do MRI for that, and they did some radiologic scoring. The reason is we know in practice that symptoms don't always correlate with active inflammation. So the FDA requires these companies not only to show symptomatic improvement, but also to confirm that inflammation is actually improving too with this medication, which I think is beneficial for all of us. And then after FDA approval, after phase 3, the company applies for FDA approval. But even after FDA approval, they continue to collect data. So there is kind of a phase 4, which is the post-marketing data. So as we go along this, you'll see that getting into a clinical trial, there are a lot of very detailed, specific requirements and some exclusionary criteria. So this provides us nice information to say, how about those patients that weren't in the clinical trial? Is this working for them as well? So this is sort of our real world data. And again, looking for any new signals that may pop up in people who've been on the medications for 5 years, a much longer period of time. So let's talk about some of the mechanisms of action that are under investigation. So the first type of medication is the JAK inhibitors. So this is, I think pictures help a lot more when we're talking about mechanisms of action. But JAK is short for Janus kinase, and Janus kinases are intracellular non-receptor tyrosine kinases that play a key role in turning on different processes in the body, so particularly inflammation. So that's what we're talking about with inflammatory bowel disease. There are 4 JAKs in the family, and when the JAKs get phosphorylated or activated, then they go into the nucleus of the cell, and they bind to specific DNAs, and that allows for transcription and production of those signals that turn on inflammation. So the medicines that we talk about are JAK inhibitors. So they're blocking that activation, so you don't get the transcription and you don't get the signals don't get turned on. So that's how they are working. So the medications you can see, so we talked about there's 4 different JAKs. Each of the JAKs have different jobs. So what's really important in these different phases of long studies is when we're blocking a certain number of JAKs, we don't always know what that downstream response is going to be. So there's a lot of different players involved here. And then 2, you can see the list of kind of medications that are under investigation or recently approved, and they have different targets. So we're not always sure exactly what those responses will look like. But Tofacitinib, trade name is Xeljanz, that one's approved for ulcerative colitis. Filgotinib completed their clinical trial. FDA rejected approval due to toxicity concerns. They are submitting approval in Europe and Japan. Upadacitinib was also very recently approved for ulcerative colitis, still in clinical trial, or may have just completed clinical phase 3 for Crohn's disease. Looking for that one. I actually looked up that top one to see what happened with that one, and I don't see anything after phase 2. So a lot of these drugs, even though they have similar mechanisms of action, some make it and some don't. So there's a lot of investigations. There's a lot of sort of background work that's going on. So I'm not going to talk about really how these drugs work and, the response and things like that, because Dr. Kappa is going to cover all that in our next, hopefully. I don't want to overlap too much as he's talking about newer therapies. So another mechanism of action is the S1P modulator. So you may have heard about this one as well. So this one, again, a completely different mechanism of action. Very, very exciting to start thinking about treatment options that patients haven't been exposed to. T lymphocytes play a key role in immune surveillance. They're part of your white blood cells that just routinely circulate through your blood system. Activation of these lymphocytes, so when they get turned on or something signals them to become active, that happens in the secondary lymphoid organs, so the spleen, the lymph node, and the Peyer's patches in the GI tract. Sphingosine 1 phosphate is a chemoattractant that guides these particular white cells, these lymphocytes, to these areas, so the particularly to the lymph nodes. it's a gradient dependent manner. So that's kind of how it pulls them into the lymph nodes. And then these medications actually trap them in the lymph node. So they no longer can circulate and go to areas and trigger inflammation. They're stuck in the lymph node, so they stay there. So again, there are 5 different S1Ps. They all have different jobs. And so as we start talking about these medications, then we have to think about sort of downstream responses and effects with these. So S1P, so Osana Mod is our first S1P that's been approved for the treatment of ulcerative colitis. Came out in May. Trade name is Zeposia. It is still in phase 3 clinical trials for Crohn's disease, so we don't know about that one yet. And then also Etrasimod is another S1P that is under investigation. So the Osana Mod is a S1P1, S1P5. The Etrasimod is a S1P1, 4, and 5. So again, a little bit different targets, and we don't know yet what's going to be better and what's going to have better response on the inflammation, as well as if any one is going to have more side effects or less side effects. So the Etrasimod is in phase 3 clinical trials. So now looking at the IL-12, IL-23 inhibitors, again, a different sort of mechanism of action, new to the market, new idea. So Ustekinemab is the one that's available right now. It's a monoclonal antibody directed against P40 subunit, which P40 is shared with both IL-12 and IL-23. And when those interleukins become activated, they signal inflammation. They turn on sort of some chemicals that signal inflammation. So that's how Ustekinemab works. But now we have these newer agents that are under investigation that are only targeting the IL-23. So again, getting more specific, getting more targeted, but then we'll have to see if that results in better response and what happens with our side effect profile. So again, risankizumab is pending approval for the treatment of Crohn's disease. So June, been told now. We're waiting on that one. I have like 5 patients that I am ready to get started on that because like we talked about, you run out of options. And then currently in phase 3 clinical trials for ulcerative colitis. There are several other interleukin-23 medications under investigation. So I just threw some names out here just so you have seen these names before. But these are 3 that are under investigation and hopefully will move forward and become available. So what are some of the changes in clinical trial design that I think are improving sort of patient experience or study subject experience? So again, we talked about the FDA still requires the use of a placebo or treatment with other medications. So you have to have something to compare this investigational product to. It sounds crazy, but we still have about a 30% placebo response in clinical trials. So I would love to say that we don't need that, but I really do think that we do because there are still 30% of patients who report feeling better when they've gotten placebo. So many studies now allow, because of this requirement for placebo, a lot of the protocols now allow earlier access to investigational product or the new medication. So there's sort of an earlier out if you're feeling terrible. And again, most of the studies allow you to stay on prednisone for sort of the induction period. So again, you're not on nothing during that period of time. 2, I have had a lot of patients who come to me and they say, well, what if I feel better and we get to the end of the study and this is the only thing that's worked for me, and then what happens? So now a lot of the companies are actually allowing study subjects who respond to stay on drug until the drug gets FDA approved. And then, once that happens, that your physician can prescribe it for you and you continue on it. So again, another sort of benefit to the patients who are in the study. Like we talked about, new mechanisms of action, looking at medications that can be added to current therapies. So that's kind of a newer trend that I've seen in some of the protocols that are coming out. What if you're doing okay, but you haven't reached that target of mucosal healing yet that Dr. Matar talked about? But you don't want to completely give up because you haven't felt, this is better. It's not all the way where you want to be. So there are some studies that are looking at things that you can add on to current therapies, which I think is an interesting idea and really fits sort of this need that we have in clinical practice. And then 2, thinking again about precision medicine, there are a lot of companies in these clinical trials that are adding special tests. So is it a blood test? It may be a test on a biopsy that you get during a colonoscopy, but really looking at what's triggering your inflammation and are you likely to respond to that medicine? So if you have, what this certain pathway that's triggering your inflammation, were you more or less likely to respond to this drug? So again, little pieces of information that we can use to try and shorten that period of trial and error where we're figuring out what helps, what's going to make you feel better. We're figuring out what's really driving your inflammation so that we can actually target that pathway. And then two, there's newer trials that are coming out focusing on these areas of need. We've got some newer studies looking at treatment of perianal fistulas. That's one of the most complicated things that we have, that we face as far as treatment challenges. And so looking at newer agents and then particular, different medications that we can use for treatment. Two, I've got some studies that are looking at treatment of pouchitis. Again, this is sort of this black hole that we've not gotten better than antibiotics as needed as far as, treatment options. And then two, these milder cases of IBD, particularly ulcerative colitis patients who, again, they're not all the way better. They don't feel great on mesalamine, but they're not ready to do an infusion or a self-injectable. So there's sort of this gap of, what can we fill in that space for the patients with milder disease. So when to think about a clinical trial, when is it an option? So like I mentioned, clinical trials are not for everyone. The companies are very specific about who they want in the studies. You have to be sick, but not too sick. You can't be pregnant. You can't be nursing. You can't want to get pregnant in the next several years. You can't have had cancer for the past 5 years. You can't have this pending surgery coming up. So it is really this narrow window. There was a study that was published that showed that about 75% of the patients that actually we see in clinic wouldn't meet criteria for a clinical trial. So it is really this narrow window of patients. But I try not to consider a clinical trial as a last resort. I don't think it's a last resort. I think it's a good option. So in my particular patients, when we're talking about changing therapy, if there is a clinical trial that I think they would be, they would meet the criteria for, I offer it as an option. The reason is a lot of clinical trials actually are excluding patients who have been exposed to 3 or 4 prior IBD drugs. So at some point, you're not going to meet the criteria to fit in that study. And then two, in my mind, you can always go back to those options that are already FDA approved. Those aren't going anywhere. And so, that sort of fills in that gap like, what if I don't feel better on this medicine? Well, great, then we go to this, or this, because those are still options. So I think that's sort of how I think about it and how I think about how it fits in sort of the treatment algorithm. And then two, there are a lot of patients who have not participated in clinical trials and have a lot of concerns about, what about my IBD care? And so I'm just very upfront with them and I say, this is voluntary. If you change your mind, it's not going to hurt my feelings. I'm not going to fire you as a patient. We will go on as if this never happened. I mean, this is completely your choice. And so just kind of addressing those things up front because I have a pretty good understanding of what concerns may be, and obviously we just have a discussion. And then it's not a one-time discussion either. We talk about it in the office. They talk about it with the study coordinator. We talk about it again with screening. And so there are many time points when, any additional questions may be addressed. And then, and again, talking about, what if the medication doesn't work for you or what if you get placebo? So talking about, in the clinical trial design, how soon can we get them on investigational drug if they don't feel better? And then I think it's also important just to provide some additional resources. So here you can, listen to me all you want, but here's things that you can read about actually, other patient perspectives. So of course, the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation has a whole clinical trials community. I've provided the website at the bottom. But what they do, they have information about patient experiences. There's patient videos. You can actually look for clinical trials. So if there's something that you have read about, you saw, phase 2 data that came out that looked amazing, and you want to find a site that's open for the phase 3 studies, you can search clinical trials here. And then also they have a clinical trial newsletter, but you can see sort of all of the tabs that you can click on through this website. And I mean, it's really encouraging for us as doctors, I think for you as patients as well, because The future is bright in IBD. This is a study from 2019, so several years ago. But at that time, 47 companies were looking at IBD therapies. They had 7 investigational products that were being studied or seeking approval for the treatment of IBD. And at that time, there were almost 50,000 patients who were participating in clinical trials. So I think it's really encouraging that there is so much effort in improving the care of IBD and coming up with these newer therapies, more targeted therapies, safer therapies. So in summary, many of our IBD patients lose response to their treatment over time and require a change in therapy. Clinical trials play a key role in the development of new treatment options for patients with IBD, but also targeting novel mechanisms of action for treatment with ideally fewer side effects. Researching new medications can help further the development of precision medicine, like we talked about, determining who will respond to certain treatments so that we can more precisely select therapies for those individual patients. And then 2, many helpful patient resources are available if you need additional questions or you want to seek out more information. So I love to include this slide. Again, it's from 2019, but this is my idea of precision medicine. So we have this whole sort of heterogeneous group of IBD patients, and it would be amazing if we could figure out, a blood test, a genome test, something where we could figure out who is at high risk for having more severe disease, who's at low risk for having severe disease, what's driving their inflammation, and really how to target their therapy and how to target their treatment based on what is their particular driver of inflammation. So thank you so much for your time and attention. I've included my email up here. This is my study coordinator's email, and then also our office. If you have any questions or want any additional information about clinical trials, I'd be happy to talk more. Thank you so much.